Good evening. This evening we are going to discuss a very important set of problems in a very important set of countries. Our focus will be mainly China, but I will be talking about China as an example of the so-called BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS have been in news lately for mainly political reasons and economic initiatives such as the Asian Infrastructure Bank, the New Development Initiative. Mainly China has played the spearheading role in this, and China probably will continue to do so in the future because of its economic clout and also its political importance. But in particular, I want to focus on the innovation capabilities of the BRICS using China as a case. The main purpose in doing this is to explore the possibilities of industrialization and development with equity in the 21st century, and the emphasis on rapidly growing or developing economies is basically to see if these economies can manage to do that. I should tell you right away that I think there are tremendous problems on the distributional side with each of these countries, and of course there are various problems of deepening democracy in each of these countries, or even democratization in places like Russia and China. But even where democratization to some extent exists, like India or Brazil, it is actually of a shallow variety and needs to be deepened much further. I should also mention at the outset that the Chinese economy is growing much more slowly than it was starting with the 1990s. The growth starting with 1990s was nothing less than phenomenal. Very few countries, in fact no country in the history of industrial economies has done that. So China has achieved a lot by ordinary count of poverty reduction. It also has made tremendous headways in reducing headcount poverty, although other types of poverty remain, especially chronic poverty. But more than anything else, the inequalities in China between the coastal areas on the one hand and the remote areas in the center and in Chinese West on the one hand, and then within each of these areas the increased inequality between the people at the top, few people at the top, and most people at the bottom. These are real causes of concern. So can China grow moderately, showing the way to the rest of the BRICS? Can China democratize? Can the other BRICS like Brazil and India deepen their democracies to reach the majority of the people? These are the important question for us to be asking right now. And the short answer is that it can only be done if there is genuine struggle and organization from below, and if there is genuine democratic internationalism from below among the BRICS countries. Having said that, I should also say that BRICS as a bloc can act, and in some cases they have already acted as a counterpoise to Japan, Western Europe, and North American bloc. This in itself is not a great achievement by any means. During the Cold War, the USSR alone acted as a counterpoise to US and Western Europe and Japan, and that gave leeways for the South to act in very different ways than has been the case in the last 40 years. I won't rehearse the history of the last 40 years of neoliberalism and how the global South the majority of the people in the global south have experienced very little improvement in their living standards, although there has been some improvement to be sure, but it is much less than what the hype about neoliberalism made it sound like, and it has been crisis-ridden, certainly at least starting with the Mexican peso crisis in 1994-95, which most people probably have forgotten, but economic historians, I think, will remember this for some time to come. And then came the Asian financial crisis in 1997-98, and that spread to both South America, to Brazil in particular, and to Russia, and shook up, I think, the kind of breezy confidence that neoliberalism had in itself. Of course, that really didn't change basic policies. There was the so-called augmented Washington Consensus, and there was, in the 1999 meeting of IFIs, a firm commitment to reduce poverty. But rhetoric aside, that kind of reduction of poverty, although it's not a bad thing at all, by itself cannot launch poor countries to the path of ecologically sustainable growth and equitable growth, which is what I want to talk about. For China, it's a complicated story because China went through a period of long revolutionary process, the Yan'an period, which was quite egalitarian but at a very low level of productive forces. Then the new democratic period from 1949 for a few years, and then the seesaw struggles regarding policies, both in the countryside and in the cities, sometimes rapid movement towards greater egalitarianism, other times stepping back, and sometimes even ultra-leftist policies like in the Great Leap Forward period, which was tragic. But China, since 1978, and especially since the 1990s, after Deng Xiaoping's southern tour, really has paid very little attention to rising inequalities, dismantling of socialist institutions in the countryside, the problems of poor peasants, and the problems of poor workers, even as it has grown. So this is something that we would like to focus on. There is a theoretical framework that heterodox economics can offer in this case that I think is quite promising. It can even be formalized. The key idea is that a complex economic system has multiple equilibria, and these multiple equilibria lead to different kinds of development paths over time as well. So if we focus on the board there, I have developed this acronym for this type of innovation system, but more generally it can be used for the economic system as a whole with some modifications. But this SCEIS, you probably can pronounce this as CASE. This is the acronym for Sustainable Social Capabilities Enhancing Ecological Innovation System. And specifically here, I want to use it for the BRICS. So the idea of capabilities is from Sen, and we have extended it to making a set of coherent social, economic, and political institutions. I will come back to that later. But just to describe this formally, the structure of any economy in this world, and the world economy as a whole, is that of a non-linear mapping, which we simply call capital N. That N is a mapping from a large multi-dimensional space, and you can identify this with, mathematically speaking, Euclidean space that is multi-dimensional. And it includes production, investment, trade, and technology, among other things. You can also include the financial sector that presents some special problems, but it is possible. And the basic equation is written down there. where a vector of output, income, investment, etc., can be determined through this non-linear model of the economy, and the small d there is the vector of final demand. So this is ultimately a demand-driven economy that produces adequate supply under some conditions. But as I said, there could be multiple equilibria, and we have to be very careful in specifying the dynamic evolution of these multiple equilibria world. I have drawn a simple picture there where you find the inputs on the horizontal axis and outputs. And outputs here include not just economic production, but also distribution as well, and other elements in the economy. And you can see that there are multiple equilibria where our nonlinear system intersects with the 45 degrees line. And some equilibria are quite low, some are quite high. Distribution in some cases is reasonably egalitarian, in other cases it is highly inegalitarian. So over the course of, let's say, 20 years or 25 years in China, we have seen it going from a low-level production system to a high-level production system to a diversified economy. But at the same time, we have seen high inequalities and dismantling of institutions of social and economic protection, as well as a decay in the local political democratic institutions that had existed, although globally speaking, that is nationally speaking, for China, there have never been, during the socialist period, with exceptions, such as during parts of the 50s, as well as the so-called Cultural Revolution, which was very confusing, but there was a democratic side to it, culminating in the formation of Shanghai Commune in 67-68, that could have been harbinger of a more democratic China. But unfortunately, Mao himself shot that idea down, and then essentially a bureaucratic state socialist system that was rhetorically responsive to the needs of the people, but actually was factionalized, and that factionalization came out into the open after Mao's death and resulted ultimately in consolidation of power by Deng Xiaoping and people around him. The policy of Deng Xiaoping and those others actually was quite simple. It was basically to create a high-growth economy where some people, as Deng said, would get rich first and others can follow. It is quite true that some people have gotten rich, very rich in fact, in China, but other people have seen only marginal improvements in their lives. Furthermore, among those people, a large number, from 100 million to 200 million people by various accounts, basically are now floating population who have no social or economic security, and they are lucky to find a job, and protection for workers in workplaces have broken down. So there is very little workers' power left institutionally in China. That's why we find more and more illegal strikes and disruptions and even violent confrontations, both in the countryside and in the cities in China. In the meantime, on the other side of the picture, the Chinese elite have correctly grasped the need for transitioning from extensive growth through export to intensive growth through innovation and increasing the buying power of the people within China. But the application of that has been very uneven. The innovation system that China actually has put in place in a hurried way has some positive features, however. It is based on strengthening the university system, strengthening the links between research and innovation in the university sector with the productive sectors of the economy, both the government productive sector and the NGO and private productive sector. This national system of innovation has correctly drawn the conclusion and implemented practically the idea of linkages between industry and science. My friend and colleague Alberto Gabriele from Italy and I, when we were both at UNCTAD in Geneva, put together a monograph on the Chinese innovation system, which I think is still highly relevant. There we cite evidence on China's innovation capabilities, which actually are already considerable. There is also the strength in terms of China's ability to quickly implement fiscal and monetary policies that are counter-cyclical, which is the main reason why China was able to recover from the crisis in 2008, which was global and affected China seriously very quickly. China actually was one of the first countries to pull out of that with a V type of both downturn and recovery. The others took much longer, and some are still trying to recover, as for example in Europe. Just to sum up, China has actually plans for 12 priority sectors: advanced storage technologies, alternative and renewable energies, biotechnology and genetics, electronic components, environmental technologies, integrated circuits and semiconductors, manned space exploration, materials technology, nanotechnology, network and communication technologies, optical and biological computing, software, and related services. So clearly, Chinese elite realized that China cannot simply be a low-wage, low value-added type of export economy and rely on demand from the rest of the world. In terms of our model, China is trying to create a final demand that is largely domestic and will drive the production and innovation domestically. The key problem for China strategically, I would say, is distributive. Unless China becomes a more equal society, conflicts, including class conflicts and ethnic conflicts in China, will proliferate. If China cannot actually develop a system of governance that is much more democratic, starting with local institutions of governance, then it will become a top-heavy, bureaucratic, perhaps state capitalist system with a larger private sector, to be sure. But it will be prone to all kinds of ups and downs of a cyclical capitalist economy. It will also be heavily integrated with the rest of the world economy in such a way that business cycles from the rest of the world will affect China, and business cycles in China will affect the rest of the world. Every year, FARs fly in Davos and elite get together there and talk about all kinds of problems, but they never quite address the issue of internal distributive problems in the most advanced countries in the world, and also top two countries in the world, namely China and the United States. But China's contradictions, I think, are too important to be left alone, and Chinese elite recognizes this. The top people in the Chinese party and in the Chinese government certainly make enough noise and sometimes even try to implement some specific policies. But so far, it has been very piecemeal, it has been very half-hearted, and in spite of controlling corruption, some of which is real, China has actually developed both a highly corrupt state sector and private sector system, and that does not bode well for the future of China. So the bottom line, the political conclusion is that unless China improves internal democracy in the real way, not just a kind of shallow rhetoric of the international organizations and US government way, but in a real way, the way it was in certain periods during the socialist construction in China, and indeed it has to go beyond that in terms of implementing and building a democratic system nationally with what I call deeply democratic institutions. I have discussed this elsewhere, so I will simply sum up by saying that it is the kind of society where democratic deliberation at each and every level becomes important, where governance is by turns, and the implementation of policies are monitored carefully, and both what we might call individual liberty and social responsibility are balanced for individuals and corporations, whether they're state-owned or whether they're privately owned. For the foreseeable future, China will continue to be a mixed economy, but because this is a highly nonlinear and complex system, we now know from the results that we have in complex systems analysis that breakdowns are possible. When the breakdowns happen, the situation can become rapidly chaotic, and it may be very difficult to even restore old equilibrium, which is really not that desirable anyway, but to move to new, more egalitarian, more democratic, more capabilities enhancing equilibria. Thank you.